Welcome to the Drew P. Whiskey Show. I'm Drew. You could probably assume that. If you did, great job. Intelligence level is, we're going to say safe at this point. Today, I'm trying to answer a question of a particular bourbon, particularly hyped bourbon, the most hyped bourbon of the year. The bourbon that's clearly, to me, been hyped in my ear holes more than any other. Also on the book face, the blogosphere. People are talking about this bourbon and have. The YouTube, WhiskeyTube, reviews are already out there about this. But I'm trying to ask the question, is it overly hyped? And what am I talking about? I'm talking about this. I'm talking about Russell's Reserve 13 year. Since this was first announced, people like myself were jacked about it because I've fallen in love with Wild Turkey. I've become a Wild Turkey fanboy. And if you did not know, Russell's Reserve is Wild Turkey. And this is well-aged Wild Turkey. This is high-proof Wild Turkey. That kind of hurt. And so those of us who were into the turkey, we dug it when we heard about high-age, high-proof, and it's non-chill filtered. That's Ratchet. Wait, Ratchet's bad. That's Trill. So, is this overhyped? Well, we're going to pop it. We're going to find out in just a minute. Also, at the end of this video, we're going to taste it up against the Russell's Reserve single barrel. This is actually a store pick that is phenomenal. This is one from Total Wine here in Milwaukee, and it's really, really good. I've had two of these. It's the best Russell's Reserve I've had, and I love it, so I'm going to try it up against Russell's 13 to see if Russell's 13 is noticeably better. Before we get into that, just a point of business, and that is that if you follow the Drew P. Whiskey channel, you know that I do barrel picks periodically with my boy, Brian Bikey from Abandoned Bourbon. We do picks for our show, for our pod, and those are available to our Patreon supporters. In the next 2 weeks, we're going to be releasing the 7-year corn whiskey that's finished in toasted and charred Spanish oak casks. We call it the Spaniard. It's corn whiskey from MGP, so it's MGP juice, aged in used cooperage, then finished in Spanish oak, and dang. Really, really good. Phenomenal. I'm drinking a lot of it, this demo bottle that I got, and you would too. You can't blame me. After that, we've got an 8-year-old 21% rye bourbon from MGP, sourced and bottled by Dancing Goat. That's going to hit probably December. Actually, betwixt those two releases, we've got our barrel pick that we've been talking about for a while from Middle West Spirits in Columbus, Ohio. That's a 4-grain bourbon, cask strength. Tastes like E.H. Taylor. And I've been waiting for that one for a long, long time. So we've got all 3 of those hitting before the end of the year, and those are available to our Patreon supporters most primarily. So if you want to make sure you get a barrel, and if you want to support the channel, go down. There's a link right below here, patreon.com/entryproofpodcast. That's where you can join the community, support the channel, get access to our barrel picks. If you also want to support in other ways, like, comment, subscribe, and follow me on Instagram at Drew P. Whiskey. Now let's do this thing. Russell's Reserve 13 year. This drops in an age of falling and resurrecting age statements. Bourbon geeks love age statements, but they've fallen away. Elijah Craig, Knob Creek, losing age statements. Wild Turkey, not exactly known for age statements. They dropped their 8-year age statement on Wild Turkey 101 a long time ago. But in 2021, age statements are making a bit of a comeback, with Knob Creek 9 showing back up on the bottle. Knob Creek 12, Knob Creek 15, so Jim Beam's doing plenty with the age statements. Then Russell's Reserve gets in on the game with a 13-year, non-chill filtered, barrel-proof release. Now the specs on it are every bourbon geek's dream. It's Kentucky bourbon, Wild Turkey specifically, at high age, at barrel proof. And it's a new addition to the Wild Turkey limited release line. I mean, we've been getting these Master's Keeps. This is decades from a few years ago. These have been quite good, and people are finally catching on to the fact that these are quite good. Now they're hard to find when they drop. Like, I've been looking for Wild Turkey 1, nothing. I don't know if it's been released in Wisconsin yet, but I really look forward to that one. I'd like to try and get it. And then we've also had a few really limited Russell's special releases, the vintages, the 1998, 2002, 2003. I've talked about those before. In my What's the Deal with Russell's Reserve video. You should watch that one. It's not bad. We're going to take it farther today, though, and go really, what's the deal with Russell's Reserve 13? It's a new release, limited. It's kind of like Stag Junior for Wild Turkey. Apparently, Eddie Russell has alluded to the fact that this is going to be released on a semi-regular basis, maybe annually, which would be sick. Like, it'd be rad to have multiple chances to score something like this, especially if it's anywhere as close to how good I remember this being when I tasted it. Stag Junior is one that I always love to score. Barrel-proof Buffalo Trace at a decent age. This is more age than Stag Junior, though, so that's kind of a win. Lower proof, depends on how you feel about proof. I'm actually okay with something in this 115 range. That's my money zone. Like, I don't feel like I need to have my face blown off by something in the 120 to 130 proof range. It's a bit superfluous. 115 is like, yeah, that's going to give me a full, rich mouthfeel without necessarily absolutely firebombing my taste buds. So everything about this bourbon tells me that I should love it. And I tried it once before. I tried it at Bardstown Bourbon Company when I was on my Kentucky trip back in July, and I was not disappointed. I liked it. What I got initially was decent amount of oak, creamy sweetness, vanilla custard, very classic premium bourbon notes, not too dissimilar from Elijah Craig barrel proof, some of the better ones like C920. Now granted, I only had like an ounce of it, but today on the golf course, and what inspired me to make this video today was my boy Eric Sawyer, member of Swing Nation. Eric, thanks pal, who brought a little sample of Russell's Reserve 13 with him, and I tasted it straight out of the sample jar. But I was like, yeah, that is really, really good, and more maple syrupy and spicy too, like cinnamon and black pepper showing up. So really complex, just out of a sample jar on the golf course right before I shanked one, or maybe no, it was right after I'd shanked one on a par 3. Not great, didn't play well. But I'm still in my golf attire. I'm channeling the energy that was given to my mouth by that Russell's 13 sample, and I'm like, you know what? Let's deep dive on this sucker. And do the market analysis, obviously. Like, I realize, even as I'm recording this video and asking, is it overhyped? I'm hyping it because the specs are exciting. Like, I'm not just going to hype something because it's from Buffalo Trace. Like, if they release a 6-year, 100-proof whiskey, it's like, well, that's fine, but those aren't specs that are going to get me jacked. If Buffalo Trace released another barrel strength, 11-year age stated something or other, yeah, I'm going to get excited about that, as I do when we're talking about well-aged Heaven Hill stuff, like Parker's Heritage 10-year heavy char. That sounds really good, right up my alley. So does this. So yes, the hype kind of is real because the specs are real, but ultimately, we have to ask the question, does the palate deliver? And what I've read in YouTube comments, because we've talked about Russell's 13 a lot in our live streams, is that people are like, oh, it's way overhyped. It wasn't that special to me. But my experiences with it up to this point have been the opposite. So I'm wondering, is it just that, hey, I would have gone for any bourbon on the golf course earlier, or I was in Kentucky when I tried it with my brother and my dad on a golf trip, so that was kind of special, and maybe that tainted my opinion of it? Or is it that just there's a massive disparity in palate preferences, and some people love it and some people hate it? Maybe that. Maybe some people just have bad taste. Enough talking. Let's do the tasting. All right, here we go. We're going to use this glass. I love this glass for tasting. This is actually a Scotch tasting glass. It's from Scotch Malt Whiskey Society. That's the emblem there. You're probably seeing all the water spots. I don't think that's really going to mess up my tasting. You know what? Let's just give it a little water rinse anyway, just to make sure. And bottle pop. Oh, you know what? It's a winner on bottle pop alone. Like, I can answer the question. No, it's not overhyped, just because the bottle treated me right. All right. I really didn't have any hesitations about opening this. I paid retail for it, $80. The secondary value is ridiculous. I don't recommend people do secondary purchasing of bourbon. But sometimes you have to hem and haw if you have a whiskey that's worth a lot of money, like $400, before you taste it, before you open it. But I had already liked this one, so I was excited to get into it. I'm going to need it later this month. Thanksgiving is coming. So today I thought, you know what? Again, inspired by Eric. Let's review it. The nose is delightful. You get oak, but you get heavy sweetness, and you get something really fruity, like figs. Like sweet, sweet fruit, not bright. You get cocktail cherries, like a solid maraschino cherry. You get it's like an old-fashioned, but without bright citrusy notes. Because you get kind of these bitters. Everything about it is deep and dark. The nose is not very hot. I mean, at 115 proof, I wouldn't expect it to burn my nose hairs. But I could just sit with this forever. It's like the perfect smelling bourbon. I could see people getting like a coffee note or spice cake. Yeah. You guys know I like that buttercream frosting note. So we're talking about spice cake with figs and buttercream frosting with coffee on the side. And maybe an old fashioned there too. It's like a 3-course meal. Yeah, of an old fashioned, sans any orange influence. No soda. I'm talking about like a true Kentucky old fashioned. And then you've got this spice cake with like a nice thick layer of buttercream frosting, seasoned with vanilla beans and figs. And that cake is good and spicy. Maybe a suggestion of like roasted carrot, and then a nice medium roast coffee. Nothing too carbonic here on the nose. And then maybe some older wood. You know, it's like if you had all of that in a library that was furnished with rich mahogany. Something like that. Nose is incredible. First sip is powerful. Like, it actually hits above that 115 proof point in terms of intensity on my virgin palate here. I had a couple sips on the golf course. I ate dinner, put the kids to bed. No other alcohol up until this point. So that first sip, really rich and intense, big sweetness, but then hit with some heat I wasn't ready for. Some zip there. Let's get back into this thing. Starting to mellow out. Classic caramel, but rich, like roasty caramel. Touches of burnt caramel, but nothing bitter. Just that really roasty, kind of smoky. We're getting on the edge of taking that caramel too far, but we cut it just at the right time. The mouthfeel is so creamy. It's big and full. There's nothing thin about it. It's got plenty of oak, and the right kind of oak. Sweet kind of oak. Not drying. So we're not bitter, not drying, and oaky. That's great. That's like right up my alley. And so going to like the aspect of hype and the fact that some people don't like this. I know people who don't like oaky notes. If it's too oaky, they're out on it. Me, I want something that is both sweet and like viscous, honey syrupy, and oaky. And if it's got those three things, you can normally sign me up. Unless it's coming with a particular orange, maybe vitaminic, Flintstone-y note that we're all familiar with. That would be the one putting off aspect. Wild Turkey never has that note. The spice cake comes through too. Like plenty of cinnamon, but not in a Jim Beamy way, not in a peanutty way. It's cinnamon in a sweet, desserty, confectionery kind of vibe. A little black pepper on the finish matched with that sweet oak. So the finish just hangs out. You're just sitting there swimming in this thing. I want to take another drink, but I don't really need to take another drink because my mouth is still drinking. This is sweet, oaky, viscous, complex. It is everything I want in a bourbon. This is automatically one of my favorites, if not my favorite whiskey I've opened. I would have to try it up against the Four Roses 2020, which I may very well do, to see if I've just dethroned that as my favorite whiskey that I have. It's not overhyped to me, especially at $80. Like, you can't overhype something that's anywhere close to this good at an $80 price point. It's just worth every penny. It's worth twice that amount. It almost makes sense that the secondary market has gone a little crazy for this one, because it actually is good. Hard to find, specs are right, and it delivers on both the nose and the palate. It's a true sipping whiskey. So my answer to the question, no, it's not overhyped. That said, this is super hard to find, but let's talk again about Russell's Reserve single barrels, which I've talked about before. I talk these suckers up. I say you should go look for these, you should buy these, because there's probably not a better value that you can just go get on the regular. 9 to 10 years old is kind of the standard for these things. And I mentioned I love this particular bottle. So let's compare the two and see, is this worth the additional hype? Like, if you've got good access to Russell's Reserve single barrels, particularly store picks, can you get by with these and not get Russell's 13? Let's talk about that for a minute. I'm going to pour a little bit of this guy. Now, if you're a collector or an enthusiast, while you could get by potentially with a Russell's Reserve single barrel, if you want something that's kind of truly unique in terms of specs, you're going to want to try and seek out the Russell's 13. If we're doing the buy bar pass thing, this is definitely a buy if you see it. For me, if you're asking what bourbon should I buy in relationship to Wild Turkey or Russell's Reserve, I'm going to say you should buy this up to, if I saw it on the shelf for $200, I'm probably going to buy it because it's so freaking good and it just matches my profile really, really well. That's a lot of money. $250 is where I'd go like, and I realize that's a ton of money. I got it for $80, but if it wasn't as good, I wouldn't be willing to pay that amount. My hope is that future releases make it maybe a little easier to get. That has not happened with Stag Jr., but maybe with Russell's 13. And if they're, again, anywhere as good as this, I'm going to be a happy man. Now let's compare these two. The nose on the Russell's Reserve single barrel is noticeably lighter. One snort. That said, it's not grainy. If this is spice cake, this is vanilla pudding. Vanilla pudding, bah. It's also got some roasted nuts, kind of pecan, not peanutty. Not too funky on this one. It's got a little bit of sweet oak, not nearly the oaky presence, the rich mahogany type library vibes that the Russell's 13 has. But a nice, rich, sweet, savory, kind of like a power bar, like a trail mix bar, kind of like a trail mix bar vibe here. Some M&Ms, milk chocolate, I like that note in here. The palate delivers a little bit of what I recall as Wild Turkey funk, and it is a nuttiness with kind of a leatheriness, maybe a touch of earthiness, kind of a wet wood, but then it's got big caramel, like straightforward caramel, vanilla pudding I mentioned, and nothing off-putting. Even the earthiness, the funkiness is not off-putting. It's not overly pronounced, and it's really, really well balanced with all the sweetness that I just articulated. Spiciness wise, not anywhere near the amount of spiciness that Russell's 13 delivered. I mean, instead of cinnamon, it's more like brown sugar. And I think the trail mix bar kind of analogy works well. It's like you've got high fructose corn syrup, big sweetness, but then you've got roasted nuts, you've got some milk chocolate, some candy to kind of round it out. Maybe if it had like a nougat filling too. So like a cross between a trail mix bar and like a Baby Ruth. So it's Diet Russell's 13, or it's Russell's 13 Junior. Very, very good. Highly recommend. Would always commend this to you. But it's not the the rich mine of ecstasy that Russell's 13 is. In bourbon terms. I'm all in on Russell's 13, y'all. You heard it here first. Well, you didn't, but you heard it here at some point. It's going to be a good Thanksgiving day with Russell's. Thanks, y'all. Stay tuned. I've got round number 2 of every bourbon you need for the perfect Thanksgiving. It was a fun video last year. One of my first videos that got some good traction. We're bringing it back. All new lineup of bourbons to take you through Thanksgiving from morning to evening. And just have the best day ever. So get ready for that. That's going to launch next week, Monday at 11. This Thursday at 8, like most Thursdays at 8. We're having a live stream. Me and Brian doing our thing. Maybe we're tasting a blind. Maybe not. Maybe we'll have a guest on because we got barrel picks coming up from a cool place called Dancing Goat. And I got to get Nick on. I don't have it scheduled yet, but Nick Moss, the Dancing Goat, most interesting man in bourbon. I did a video actually, a little like 4 or 5 minute special. Maybe it wasn't that long. But I called it The Dancing Goat. It was a little spotlight of Dancing Goat Distillery and Nick. You should watch that. I'll put it in the show notes below. Hope you guys have a good rest of your day. Find some good bourbon, drink it. Stay healthy. Stay safe. And keep it neat.